Don't make a name for yourself as a cyberpunk by how you live. Make a name by how you die.
Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a show that fundamentally understands what a capitalist dystopia does to change the lives of the people who live in it. This one phrase sums up the entire plot, conflict, and tragic resolution of the narrative. In Cyberpunk Edgerunners, hypercapitalism creates what feels like an inescapable narrative of suffering, survival, and suicide, one that is ultimately, if narrowly, defeated by a dream beyond Night City. Created by Raphael Yaki and gorgeously animated by Studio Trigger, Cyberpunk Edgerunners rightfully blew everyone away in 2022. The show almost single-handedly saved the Cyberpunk 2077 video game after CD Projekt Red's disastrous and buggy initial launch was met with criticism, and it renewed interest in the pen-and-paper tabletop RPG created by Maximum Mike Pondsmith that the game and the show were both based on. There are many running themes in the story of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, most notably the theme of corporate capitalism and how it divides and conquers not only groups of people, but individuals themselves, physically, socially, and spiritually. The more classic themes of young love, friendship, and coming of age are present in the story, but in subdued and sometimes aborted ways because it's all washed out in Night City's irradiated neon glare. It is this dystopia that tragically alters, destroys, and devours the life of the story's protagonist, David Martinez, and nearly does the same to the story's heroine, Lucy. And it's impossible to tell the story of Edgerunners without discussing the primary character of the series, Night City itself. Before we get into it, I want to talk a little about what cyberpunk is. There is a ton of discussions about the ins and outs of the semantics of the punk suffix, but for the purpose of this essay, we'll be using a broadly agreed upon definition that I think captures it best. Punk usually has to do with an aggressively subversive countercultural aesthetic that is fundamentally about hope. Solarpunk, cyberpunk, steampunk, all the punks envision alternate futures, something where the punkish action is having effect. And it generally does, even in our real life. Actual rebellion, actual punk provokes a reaction, a response from the powers that be. Studio Ghibli films, I think, have some pretty good, rarely cited examples of stories worthy of a punk suffix. Radical kindness and empathy, after all, are extremely subversive if you're directing them towards the wrong people, after all. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is not this at all. Edgerunners and stuff like Blade Runner fall very closely into what is sometimes derisively called neon liberal, which I don't think is a particularly useful term even if it's hilarious, but honestly better described as corporate dystopia. Up until now, these were usually seen in novels, but everything about Edgerunners is about the horror of a society and most of the characters in full submission to the ideals of the corporate hellscape they live in. They aren't rebelling. They're slavishly, worshipfully living its story to their dying breaths with one exception. But what is the story of Night City, you ask? Well, it's a familiar one.
It don't get much more romantic than that in Night City.
Night City is a beautiful neon metropolis filled with megastructures, superhighways, and corporate towers that light up the night sky with vibrant advertisements. It is a beautifully realized, wild look at a futuristic, cyberpunk American city, but it isn't. The streets of Night City are choked with the downtrodden, the homeless, the suffering. Every waking hour is fraught with the struggle and the fear that a stray bullet will end your life, and the city only shrugs. Night City is called the City of Dreams, but it is built on a foundation of empty promises. Sound familiar? Science fiction is always about the fears of today, not tomorrow. Night City represents the culmination of the worst trends in our society today, and reflects a true hell that, despite being near future, represents the end of human life as it is understood, reducing it down to the most basic forms of survival in a hostile environment. The power of this environment is enforced by a story that in this futuristic hellscape of a habitat is told and retold by its corporate overlords to the point that it's basically gospel. The story of Night City is this: nobody is special, but anyone can become special if you work hard enough and are lucky enough. You can make an impact and die in a way that immortalizes you. This, of course, is nothing but lies. It's more convenient to die and imagine yourself to be immortalized rather than live with the reality that people will eventually forget you ever existed. It is built on the ideas of hypercapitalism, the lie of survival of the fittest, and the inevitable suffering caused by pursuing these ideas. The foundations of hypercapitalism ensure Night City is less a place to live and more of a meat grinder, a machine that is fueled by its citizens' bloodshed, broken dreams, and empty wallets. Everyone who lives in Night City is part of that machine. And no one seems to care. They're apathetic, and why wouldn't they be? If you're not a corpo or a celebrity, you're one bad day away from being dead in the streets somewhere. And even if you're lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family at Arasaka or have the good fortune to become successful on your own, you're just as likely to wind up dead in the streets somewhere. The story of Night City consumes and destroys everyone inside it. Every person who lives within its boundaries is tied to it. They cannot imagine a future beyond Night City. The one way that some people feel they can regain some control over their lives, stick it to the man and make some money while doing it, is by becoming an edgerunner, a mercenary specializing in tech and guns, a soldier of fortune. This life, however, still leads down the path towards eventual horrible death, only this time through self-destruction. I also find it really interesting that a core part of the representation here is the incredibly explicit depiction of what being a cyborg in this show looks like. The characters literally undergo multiple surgeries, amputations, removal of internal organs, literally tearing themselves apart to achieve an illusion of control over their lives. As mercs upgrade their cyberware, they slowly lose their humanity, and with it, their grip on reality, developing cyberpsychosis, a condition that causes them to relive traumatic events while going berserk and attacking anything nearby with a pulse. Cyberpsychos are put down by corporate-sponsored police units. Not because of the loss of life, of course not, but the risk of damage to property. So these are your options. Work yourself to death, rip yourself apart, or go out in a blaze of glory trying to make a name for yourself.
I'm built different. I just know it.
Enter our protagonist, David Martinez. David is a 17-year-old kid growing up on the main streets of Night City. He's poor, but is able to attend the prestigious Arasaka Academy thanks to his mother's job working for Night City's health services. He's a straight-A student, top of his class, but he doesn't fit in due to his poor socioeconomic status. He's bullied by his peers and sells XPDs to scrape together extra cash for him and his mom, and God, do they need it. The name David is Hebrew in origin and popularized by the famous King David, the second king of ancient Israel. David is viewed as a complicated but mostly heroic figure in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and has had lots of wacky adventures over the course of any of those texts, but the story of David and Goliath is possibly the most famous. We'll get to that later. Despite having the name of a king, David's life is one of poverty. His mother barely makes enough to keep their appliances running, and in order for him to keep up to date with his classes, he has to buy bootleg updates from sketchy sources. Cutting corners like this causes him and his mom even bigger financial problems in the long run. David's daily routine literally involves him plummeting to his potential demise every morning on the way to school, and during his daily journey through the city, he sees death and destruction and misery all around him, and he's apathetic to it. Night City has made him so. David does take on some important life lessons from two mentor figures throughout the story. One of them his mother Gloria, which is another deeply religious name referencing what is basically a song of adulation towards an almighty god, while the other is the leader of an Edgerunner crew, Maine. Both of them impart wisdom about life in Night City and its bloody lessons. These lessons shape David's perspective on life and ultimately lead to his downfall. Gloria Martinez is a single mother who works as an EMT, driving the meat wagon, scraping the bloody remains of gunned-down cyberpsychos and Night City residents who can't afford health care off the pavement. She works so hard and makes so little that in order to pay for David's schooling, she sells cyberware she steals off the corpses she recovers. Gloria exhausts herself to make ends meet and ensure David has the best possible education she can manage. Through tears, she shares her dream of one day seeing David happy and successful at the top of the social hierarchy in Night City.
You have to work hard and rise through the ranks. My son at Arasaka Tower, top floor, I can just see it.
And then she's unceremoniously caught in a drive-by shooting and dies from her injuries because of how hard she worked. Gloria Martinez imparts her most important lesson to David. It is a noble cause to work yourself to death for others. It is noble to light yourself on fire that others stay warm. Later on, David meets Maine and his crew. Maine's solid. Tough. He's a good leader. He takes a liking to David almost immediately. He shows him the ropes, teaches him how to drive, how to take care of himself, and imparts a certain fatherly wisdom that David never got at home. Maine very explicitly embodies the outward ideal of Night City's destructive narrative. Eventually, though, Maine does start to lose his grip on reality, and when prompted by Dorio to slow down, he refuses. Maine tries to hide the early signs of cyberpsychosis from his friends. He can't quit. He has to keep going. No stopping. But all the years of cyberware upgrades and combat drugs have caught up to him, and Maine goes psycho like the rest. After losing it and getting Dorio killed, he gives up. He tells David that he can't save him, and when the police come kicking down the doors, Maine tells David,
Fast is what you do best, ain't it? Just keep running.
And then he goes out with a bang. Through Maine's death, David receives his second most important lesson. Death is the only way out. It is the end to achieve. Which gives us the truth of that story, the mainstream that Maine represents. These lessons combined transform David from a clever kid with a theoretically bright future ahead of him into a chrome fiend, fully bought and sold into the narrative of live hard, work hard, and go out in that blaze of glory. But for him, it's represented in a martyrdom complex. His Ripperdoc warns him that with every upgrade to his cyberware, his risk of cyberpsychosis increases. And yet, he runs headlong into danger without a thought for his own safety. Constantly looking for action, he chases the hive, throwing plans out the window and risking his own safety for others on his team. Don't get me wrong, David cares about his friends, but by showing such carelessness for his own health and safety, he puts them all at risk. The martyrdom is the thing he's subconsciously chasing. It is the end, as David has no dream beyond it. David is not a dreamer. David's life so far has essentially taught him that the possibility of a better future is non-existent for himself. In Night City, people don't live, they survive. So instead of fighting for his own dreams, he fights for the dream of the person he is closest to. The only person in Night City with a dream at all.
Looks like a prison from here. A cage of light.
Lucy is the heroine of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, as well as the only character who dares imagine a life beyond Night City. Lucy is a netrunner, a skilled hacker in the cyberpunk universe, who introduces David to the edge-running life and unintentionally gives David something to live for. She is jaded, oftentimes gloomy or depressed, but Lucy is also the only person in the story who's truly alive. The name Lucy literally translates to light or light bringer. Like a falling star, she shines a light on David's life. When she becomes tethered to him by falling in love, she becomes embroiled in the mess and apathy just like he does. She becomes trapped in the mire of Night City, even calling it a prison made of light that drowns out her own. Most of the characters believe, live, and die by the story of Night City, the lie told by Night City's overlords and perpetuated by its people, that working hard and dying in a blaze of glory will immortalize you. All of the inhabitants within Night City are bound to this narrative and even enshrine it as a way of life. However, it is a story that only has the one ending, death, in service to the story itself. Blood sacrifices on the altar of wealth and corruption, symbolized by Arasaka's dark tower that looms over the city's people. In such an environment, no other life seems possible or honestly even worth pursuing, but it only holds true as long as people believe in it. Lucy does not. She's already escaped Arasaka's horrors once, and she doesn't want to just survive under their shadow. She wants to live, and to most importantly, get away. She dares to dream beyond the neon prison she calls home. She wants to leave Night City someday, take a rocket ship and fly to the moon. Her dream may seem small and insignificant and even childish, but the point is that she has one. No other character in this entire show is capable of dreaming beyond Night City. While other characters are doomed to the tragedy of this awful fucking place, Lucy hangs on by a thread, because even though she does get bogged down in the dredge of the bloodshed and suffering, her dream expands beyond the city's confines. One of the things that really struck me about the setting is how it is a platonic version of hell. It represents sex without bodies. It is food without sustenance. It is pleasure without feeling or purpose. Relationships without trust. It is the light that shows you everything is just a shadow of what you imagined it to be. In these scenes, for example, David and Lucy are literally naked and sitting next to each other, and yet they could not be further apart. They are allegedly in a relationship, but they are total strangers. Neither knows what the other is thinking or even doing. David keeps his mother's ashes as a reminder of her lesson to him. Gloria worked tirelessly and died trying to give him a future. Once David becomes a merc, he works tirelessly to help Lucy's dream come true, to the point of risking his own life and dying so she can leave Night City and follow that dream. Lucy almost fell prey to the same thing. She became bound to the messed up samsara of the city through her relationship with David. David removed himself from the equation in a fatally destructive and truly tragic way, and the concussive force of that trauma wrenched her free enough to escape on that dream. After all, it was all she had in the end, which put her in a place very similar to where she started. Although this time, as an adult woman, with more wounding and the capacity to physically walk away. Something most people don't get to do after meeting Night City's boogeyman.
My business is with the kid.
Night City is ruled by a billionaire megacorporation that requires a steady stream of human sacrifices and dark bargains to sustain its power. The city is like a monster, gorging itself on the blood of its people. All those within its jaws are doomed, herded by the city's avatar, destroyer of men, Atom Smasher. Though it may seem simple at first, the name Atom Smasher literally translates to destroyer of men, or man killer. Adam being the biblical name of the first man, and Smasher is a person or device that breaks and destroys things. It is the perfect name for the legendary boogeyman of Night City. Atom Smasher is the physical, human-ish embodiment of Night City. Unwavering, uncaring, and evil to the core. He has gone full Borg. His body is 98% cybernetic, and whatever empathy or humanity he had to begin with, probably not much, has been totally lost, replaced with a deep, adrenaline-fueled lust for violence, destruction, and murder. Calling him human is a stretch to begin with. The guy's a fucking monster. He doesn't know David. He doesn't care about David. He is here to kill David, not because of some personal grudge, but because he craves violence. He describes people as meat, and Smasher is a meat grinder.
All the same meat to me. I'll slaughter each and every one of you. None leave the slaughterhouse. Not alive.
Atom Smasher lacks all empathy and is fueled by pure bloodlust. Bringing it back to that old Bible story, David and Goliath, about a small, scrappy peasant who in the place of a cowardly king challenges the monstrously huge warrior Goliath to single combat. And using a sling and a rock, David is able to defeat Goliath and claim the king's throne. Similarly, David Martinez was a small, scrappy kid living in poverty. And I don't know about you, but Atom Smasher sure seems like a Goliath in this story to me. Only this time, God isn't on David's side. Smasher kills David. The city kills a man. The city keeps moving, unaware and uncaring of anything to do with David or his friend's sacrifices. David doesn't die a hero. He doesn't even die a legend. He just dies. All of his friends, they die too. Night City shrugs and moves on. By the time of Cyberpunk 2077, less than a year later, David and his crew, with one exception, are all dead and long forgotten. The tokens of legacy that David left behind are his jacket and a drink named after him at the afterlife. Having a drink named after you isn't immortality.
Not a tale for the next dreamer.
Cyberpunk as a genre is about spitting in the face of authority and fighting back against the capitalist system built to crush the human spirit. It is about rebellion and love and the struggle to stay human in a world that tries to force you to be anything but. It is about people craving real connection in a cold, uncaring digital world. It is about waking up. Corporate dystopia is about how we lose ourselves to its willful fragmentation, how we submit our bodies and dreams to a story handed down by a fist. It is how we stay asleep. A better world is only possible if we are alive to imagine it. This is why Edgerunners is a valuable piece of science fiction. We have lived through almost an entire generation of speculative fiction that cannot imagine a happy ending. We have come a very long and genuinely sad way from speculative fiction along the lines of Star Trek, for example, where audiences could imagine the space age and technology and exploration as being something hopeful. That perhaps by the space age, we will have learned from our mistakes, grown past stupid shit like institutional racism amongst our own people. That wonderful technology could be of benefit to everyone, and we'd be working on growing in empathy and understanding for each other and our planet. That has not happened. Economic misery, the global effects of imperialism, war, fading facades have made it really hard to imagine goodness. The benefit of the doubt is seen as foolishness, and how could it not be? The 90s has also given rise to a whole era of uniquely dark stories, and post 9/11, fiction has taken on a very pre-World War II vibe of everything is terrible, and stories and even humor are dominated by fears of the apocalypse, helpless laughter in the face of impending doom, nihilism, and what feels like the truly inevitable tragedy of 1,000 years of human failures. Much of the last decade has fixated on things like zombies, how our collapse is inevitable because of the fragility of our systems, with corporate dystopia trying to exploit and monetize every second of our lives and every iota of information about us. It feels impossible not to buckle under what feels like the miserable, inescapable pointlessness of it all. And science fiction is dominated by the struggle against dystopia to tragic and hopeless ends. It all becomes too big to beat, even in our minds. But by focusing so heavily on these things to the exclusion of anything else for whatever reason, we rob speculative fiction and the imagination of its power to liberate us from the current circumstances and fashions. Climate scientists and activists of all kinds warn very heavily against giving into despair. It produces apathy, it shrinks the worldview to the point where you can't do anything because everything has been established as a lost cause. But you can't have something like Cyberpunk without the ability to give something the benefit of the doubt. All things, including a better future, are only possible because someone imagined that they could be. To quote Ursula K LeGuin, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then, so did the divine right of kings." Cyberpunk and corporate dystopia as genres don't tell us anything about our futures, but serve as mirrors to tell us about our own present. Our world today is a suffering capitalist hellscape. We are living in dystopia right now. Whether or not we are capable of committing to a cyberpunk future is up in the air. Radical kindness, radical empathy. It is radical dreams that put us on the moon. But someone had to believe leaving Earth, leaving the story, could be done in order to do it. The obsession with dying and being remembered is fueled by a life of struggling to exist and finding meaning. At the end of their lives, everyone wants to be remembered. So much so that for as much as we laugh about, "Witness me! Witness me! Witness me!" It's impossible not to understand how human beings can become enslaved to this desire. Everyone wants confirmation that their lives mattered. And they do. You matter. Your life matters. Your life matters to everyone around you, and even if you feel alone, there are strangers out there that care about you just for the fact that you are alive. That their lives are made better just because you are there in the present with them. The lie that death somehow makes your life more memorable is just that, a lie. You aren't remembered for how you die necessarily. You're most remembered for how you lived. And any time alive is better than being dead, because it is living dreamers who make the difference. Even if that difference is that you dreamed at all. Whew! That was a heavy one. Thank you all so much for watching. What did you guys all think of the themes in Cyberpunk Edgerunners? Was anyone else but me surprised at how on the nose the religious naming was in this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell to make sure that you see all of our future videos. We've got some really cool stuff coming, including Owl House on the horizon again. Stay warm out there this holiday season, take some time to unwind and dream, and we will all see you in the next one. This is the Bat from Idle Scree signing off. Whee!